In this video, I'm going to show you how I made these hexagon shadow boxes to house my moth collection using my new Bridge City Toolworks universal gauge and adjustable square. Let's get into today's project. All right, so my game plan, I want to challenge myself for the next level of making these. I've done quite a few of this style frame. I have a whole video on it where I mounted a bunch of butterflies, and I learned a lot from this project. So I want to take all the things that I learned and I want to challenge myself to mount these cool moths that I've been collecting. So I'm gonna cut out doing the exact same process, but instead of doing a square or a rectangle, I'm gonna do a hexagon. So it's just gonna basically change the miter cut that I'm doing ultimately, and then how many cuts I'm gonna have to make with the glass. Speaking of glass, I picked up a bunch of these frames from the 99-cent store. I have a bunch to work with. I got my fun little moths that I'm gonna close up, even though it says butterflies only. Might change this to insects only because I have quite a few different insects in the future that I wanna mount. And basically it's just to identify this is not food. It's going in the refrigerator. Let's get into the project. All right, perfect. Now that I got my grooves cut all the way down the board, I just need to now cut my angles to turn this into a hexagon frame. So I'm excited to be using my Bridge City Toolworks universal gauge. There's so many different features, but this feature I'm really excited about, which these different shapes, it has the different angles that you'll need to set it for to cut those different shapes. So we're doing a hexagon, so we're gonna do a 30 or a 60-degree angle. I'm gonna set this to that. I'm gonna bring it over here and I'll set the table saw, and then we'll get to cutting our angles and make this into a hexagon. I really like having the feature of the magnets on the bottom because it just attaches to the table saw so nicely. So let's bring the blade up and change the angle. All right, now that I got both of my hexagon frames sanded down and all taped up, I'm going to move over to cutting some glass. What I'm gonna do is lay it out, and I'll probably give myself about a little over 1/8 of an inch, since the groove that I cut is about 1/4 of an inch deep. That way I have a little bit of wiggle room. But ultimately, I'm excited because I'm gonna use this bad boy, the Bridge City Toolworks adjustable square. It's cool, it's got the same locking mechanism that the other tools have. The nice thing is that I can change the angle and then lock it down. That's gonna make it really nice for cutting the glass, since I got a bunch of different angles to cut down using my handy dandy glass cutter. I'll make sure to use a cutting mat and my gloves. But enough talk, let's get to cutting some glass. Well, while we wait for the moths to be ready to mount, I guess it's time to give these guys a clear coat. That way when we assemble everything, it's ready to go. So let's just make it easy on ourselves and do a little spray finish. Let's get to it. so the insides and each side have gotten a coat, so let's flip them and get the other side. You can already tell the difference, just bare to having a clear coat on it. I did use a little steel wool in between each coat just to make them extra smooth. We're looking good. Alright, so game plan, I'm gonna glue up basically these four, what is that, 1, 2, 3 sides, and I'm not gonna glue these two, but when I glue it together, I'll tape it all together, which will keep it all clamped and in the right angles. But then once it's all dry, I can pop, boom, these two off and slide the glass in. Once the glass is in, I can glue up the rest. Alright, so now that the frames are drying up, it's time to work on the moths. But like I said, I'm not going to show you in this video how I do this on the mounting board because I have a whole video on it that you can check out right here. But without further ado, let's make this a fun transition, right? Alright, so now that both the moths are flattened, mounted, and ready to be encased in their shadow boxes with glass, time to untape these, add our glass to one side, add our moths, put in the other side of the glass, and then glue up our last two edges that haven't been glued up. Then we're pretty much done with this project. So let's get after it. So while untaping my glue up, I had a kind of an aha moment. I didn't glue these two that way that I could insert the glass. But what I could have done was glued at least these two, so then it would have come off as one piece, and then all I would have had to do is glue these two joints, where now this is gonna get, you know, a little bit more precarious. And I had that moment of thought when I was going to untape them, and I thought about, oh gosh, this would have been great to just do something like that where it was just one whole little piece to connect to this other piece once the glass is in. All right, back to it, let's get at it. Now that both of my moths are mounted on the glass, I have little spacers underneath so they rise up just a little bit. They're in the center of the glass, which is perfect. Now all that's left is to slip them into the frames and then glue up the last couple pieces. Let it dry and then we'll go put them on a shelf. So I did end up gluing these two pieces together. That way it's just one piece to glue up. So ultimately I just taped everything back up, glued these two joints so everything matched up, and we're ready. Let's do it. All right, now that the glue's dry, it's time to take off the tape and display them. I'm really pumped on how these Hexagon shadow boxes turned out with the mounted moths. I'm glad I was able to put a couple techniques that I had learned from past projects, as well as I learned a couple new techniques that I can put into future projects. I have a huge thank you to Bridge City Toolworks for sending over their universal gauge and their adjustable square. It was a huge help when making this project. Thanks again for watching today, friends, and until our next build together.